Pub. The Cottage Grove Genealogical Society and the downtown Cottage Grove sponsor the History Pub. But in Cottage Grove we have a group of historic organizations that all work together. We collaborate, and those are the Cottage Grove Historical Museum, the Cottage Grove Genealogical Society, the Oregon Aviation Society, the Cottage Grove Historical Society, the Cottage Grove Library, Bohemian Mining Museum, and Singing Creek. Our speaker this evening is Dr. Bob Zybach. He's a forest scientist who earned his PhD at Oregon State University. He is a descendant of Oregon Trail pioneers who came in 1851 and 1852. He has published more than 200 articles and editorials on topics of forestry and local history over the past 40 years. Bob coincidentally is related to David E. Jackson, Jedediah's business partner, which is kind of cool. Famous mountain man and namesake for Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Bob started doing research on Jedediah in the late 1980s. He's created a popular educational website, and that's ORWW.org. And if anybody needs it, I'll have it for you during the program or after. Dr. Bob Zybach currently works for his grandson Aaron and two great-grandchildren, Kendall and Tyler, who live in Corvallis. And I want to thank Bob for returning to the History Pub. He was here 1 year ago this month and did the program on Letitia Carson, which was fabulous. And we hope that we can figure out a way to capture that on video.
One of these days.
One of these days.
This program just got finished about 2 hours ago, so I've never given it before. I'm going to try to keep it to about 45 or 50 minutes. This program is in two parts. The first part is the Jedediah Smith Rendezvous from 2003. I led that tour. It was 4 days. It followed Jedediah's route from Smith River in California to Fort Vancouver. So that's the first half. And then the second half, we'll be looking at my first sales pitch ever on a program for the Umpqua Memorial. So I would urge everybody to donate locally, and then if you know somebody that's really wealthy, maybe have them help sponsor our work that I'll explain. So Jedediah Smith Society is founded about 1962 or 63, University of Pacific. I was a member in the late 80s, early 90s, quit for about 30 years, rejoined with a friend of mine, and got put in tour of a rendezvous along the Oregon coast, recreating Jedediah Smith's tracks through western Oregon in 1828. We started out at Crescent City in California, where the Smith River comes through. This is a mural of Smith on a whole building, so they're really into remembering him and his legacy. I put together 4 guidebooks. They're all available online. You heard Debbie say that we've got a website up, and the guidebooks are highly detailed. They're the most detailed mapping and location of Jedediah Smith's travels through western Oregon ever. There's 4 of them. We put one together for each day, and that was our guide as we traveled in his footsteps nearly 200 years later. Here's one of the maps. We made these maps with Vila Grenberg, GIS person for Douglas County, and that's too small to see, but each spot with the label is as close as we can tell exactly where Jedediah Smith camped on that day, and that's his travel route. They had 18 or 19 people. It varied. They had about 300 horses and mules to start. They lost lots of them to drowning or falling off cliffs, or a few of them were shot by Indians for dinner. So they had an amazingly large amount of livestock to transport along the coast that had never been done before. So this is before Highway 101. What we did is took each campsite on each day that we have a record and we transcribed the record. Jedediah Smith kept a journal. Harrison Rogers, his sergeant at arms, kept another journal, and those are the two earliest histories we have of a lot of different tribes of people, a lot of different locations of the Redwoods and the Oregon coast. So here's a sample page. You can't read it, but if you go to the website, you can. This shows all the people that were present during this day of the trip, this travel part, and then it's got locations. So we can see two journal entries on exact days, on exact locations. So we got maps, we got index, and we've got the historical record. So here's our group and our first starting spot. This is just south of Crescent City on an overlook. And there is where Jedediah Smith and 280 horses and mules and 18 people traveled, and we can see two campsites here. Here's a aerial photo. It's a little bit light, you can't quite see it, but the red line there and the points that are labeled are exactly where Jedediah Smith traveled. And when we say exact, there's 300 horses, so it's a variable line. And where they camped out on the 2 days that we've got records for. So we were looking out over this location and we're getting ready to head north. One of our first stops is Jedediah Smith State Park. It's just up the Smith River. It's just east of where he crossed. It's unlikely that he or his crew ever went there. They were on the perimeter, but there's no way you take 300 horses into the Redwoods. They were on the perimeter of that, but they were in a place called Elk Valley, which gives you an idea. People lived there, elk lived there. That meant there wasn't any giant redwoods. So there's our group on the Smith River. And here is the crossing spot. This is a little bit west of Jedediah Smith Park. This is where they cross the Smith River, as near as we can tell, from the far side there, which is south, and crossing at this location. So we were right where the troops were. This is the second day. Now we're getting ready to go up into Oregon. So we've got a guidebook for the second day. It's set out exactly like the guidebook on the first day. It's got every single day, every single campsite, and it's got the records from that campsite. So it's a complete earliest history of those locations, and he's coming up the Oregon coast now. So there's the coastal route. Again, we're hopeful that people from Brookings or Coos Bay or places along this route can go and check out these campsites. And we're humans, so there's errors. But these are the closest that have ever been done. I worked with 2 or 3 other experts on Jedediah Smith and his travels. So these locations along the coast, these campsites, probably can be refined a little bit here and there and made better. And that would be a fun thing to do with the classroom. So here's a park just north of Brookings, as we're traveling along the coast, and we can see evidence of the 1700 earthquake. And probably a lot of you know, on January 30th, about 10 o'clock at night, there's a Cascadian slippage, and it sent a tidal wave to Japan, so we know what happened. And it totally created giant cliffs and submerged forests all along the Oregon coast. So travel was really difficult. And to give you an idea of the scale here, if you look over at the base of the cliff, there's about a dozen people there. So figure 300 horses and 15 men in a land that they've never seen before, and with people that have never seen white people or black people before. There was at least 2 Métis, French Canadian, maybe 4. So they were half French, probably half Iroquois, and 1 black man. In this group. So as the first black man to have traveled by land to California, Peter Ranney, that's what he's famous for, but also the first black man to travel up along the Oregon coast. Marcus Lopez was killed in Tillamook in, I think, 1780s or something, so he didn't have a good experience, but Ranney was traveled all along the Oregon coast, all the way from the Rocky Mountains to California, spent the winter in California, and now he's traveling with this group. So here we are leaving. This is probably from somewhere around the trail. He did not go down to the beaches except where there were long stretches of sandy beach. He had to go up and over the bluffs. And if you're familiar with the geography, there's really steep canyons where the rivers and creeks come through. So trying to herd 300 horses and 15 men up through heavy brush. There's no pack trails. There's Indian foot trails that they're following. They are having to pioneer, in every sense of the word, a new trail, a new livestock trail, a pack trail through a complete wilderness with no map, no historical information, no ability to speak any of the languages any of the people were speaking. It was a totally foreign experience, and we've got the record in day books. This is a Umpqua Massacre. Packwood, I can't remember his first name, but it was the grandfather of Packwood that was our senator for, Bob Packwood, that was our senator for a lot of years. His grandfather was a gold miner. Packwood, Washington is named for him. But in 1851, he led a group of local people on a really disgusting killing spree of local Nassau Indians near the mouth of the river there. Nobody was charged with it. Apparently a chief or leader fired a gun. Somebody said it was in the direction of people working along the bay. And so they got together, a group of people, and went in and murdered all the women and children and men that were in the village at the time. So this is a memorial that the descendants of those tribe members have set up, a memorial to that massacre. How many people heard about the Nassau Massacre before now? Less than 1%. It's, we have a lot of history in Oregon that people have purposefully avoided. I'm not sure why, but this is a part of it. This is Seven Devils. So this is on the route that they're traveling. They're along the coast at this point. And another shot of Seven Devils. So instead of going inland, they've got grazing here. Pasturage for 300 horses and mules is a lot. So they had to set the trail not only to break through brush and to go up and down cliffs, but also they had to find places where the horses and mules could eat. And 300 horses and mules need a lot of pasture. And since there was no livestock there before, there was no purposeful creations of pasture, so that was a real difficulty on the way. At the mouth of Seven Devils, there's a fair amount of pasturage there. I'm having a mind blank on this. This is, oh man.
The Oregon coast.
It's the Oregon coast. There's a lookout here from the Three Seas, and I should know the name of this. Cape Arago. I think that's it. No, it's not Perpetua. It might be Arago. Here's something acres that Shore acres. Okay, I am hard of hearing. This is Shore Acres. It's just up from the Cape. This is a major park now. It was a major development by the first real mill owner in Coos Bay. And this is, we went from Shore Acres to Sunset Bay. Sunset Bay, they stayed here 2 or 3 days. They had pasturage, and we can see the result of the 1700 earthquake. There are stumps that come up in here when the tide's low, and we can see that the cliffs just dropped. But it did leave pasturage, so this was an area that the remaining horses and mules and people stayed for a couple days, had good relations with the Indians. There's about 100 Indians came into camp. So this is a drawing as they're leaving, and they're going through South Slough from Shore Acres. This would be to Charleston, and then up to Coos Bay. But the artist drawing, you can get an idea of 300 horses, and also some guys that are trapping beaver along the way. So they're trapping beaver, they're hunting for their food, they're getting really poor nutrition a lot of the time. At points they're down to a quarter cup of flour a day. They have one dog, they eat it, so times are tough. This is the hollering place in Coos Bay. This is undoubtedly, almost certainly, where they came and then swam the horses and lost 2 or 3 to drowning over to the sand dunes on the far side. But at the far side at that time in 1820s, it wasn't sand dunes, it was pasturage and small lakes. It was a different vegetation pattern than we have now. But the hollering place is called that because the Indians could holler from one side to the other. Somebody would send over a canoe and they could go back and forth. It's a narrow spot near in Coos Bay. So then they hit the dunes. They were the first historical record of anybody on the dunes. They hardly kept any notes, but again, pasturage is a problem. Horses are a problem. They're going up, they're looking for Fort Vancouver. They've heard about it. Nobody has ever left any records of this land ever before. So when they're hitting the dunes, they have no idea how long they last, how bad it is, or where to find pasturage. So here's a typical page from the report. It's transcription of Harrison Rogers' notes, but it's also a transcription of notes by Alexander McLeod when they come back later on. So as Jedediah Smith is going up, they're leaving records, but on the recovery mission, they also left records. So in each one of these locations, we've got an index and we've got a record, and that's the first historical record of that area of the Oregon coast. The entire first historical record of the South Coast is as these men are traveling north. This is hard to see, but this is an 1857 map, and right there is a spot on the mouth of Smith River, and the previous entry we saw was July 13th. On July 14th, at that spot, 15 men were killed. It's famous as the Umpqua Massacre. It was more famous in the 1950s than now. They wrote a book on Jedediah Smith, and Umpqua Massacre was chapter 13. And then about 20 years ago, political correctness said, no, we can't call it a massacre. So they called it a skirmish. But if you use a dictionary, it was a massacre and not a skirmish. So here's a 1939 aerial photo. And this road up through there, there's the massacre site. Mouth of Smith River is right here. There's the Umpqua River. And that road right up through there formed a dike. So you can see a creek coming out, a drainage coming out, but that changed the whole drainage in there. So the area where the massacre occurred was altered significantly by the construction of this road, which created a dike. So about 1950s, they put in a bridge, and then that connected to that road, and the intersection of the two roads is where the burial was, and we're going to go into that for a second. This is what it looks like today. There's the intersection, and in that area there is where 15 men were killed. So as we're finishing up the tour, we stop here, and people say, you know, we need a monument. This is just a bare pullout. There's no record of these men here. This is one of the most important historical events, not only in US history, but British history. Jedediah Smith and those people, and we'll talk about it in a second, when they went with the Hudson's Bay Company, they had no idea there was Americans there. We had a joint occupancy agreement to 1818 that said both the British and the Americans get to trap and hunt and fish in this area, which was called the Oregon Country then, but which was basically the western US. And the British had set up a fort, and they were building a newer, bigger fort. at Fort Vancouver, and they were basically claiming the territory through what we like to call colonialism now. And so to find a bunch of Americans there was really unusual. So for the tour, to kind of wrap it up, we went on to the Willamette Valley. This is Monroe area. The Willamette Valley was burnt pretty clean, lots of pasturage, lots for livestock. There's a native man at the time. He's wearing deerskin, fox hat, but he's also using a sealskin quiver. So he's using products from the Oregon coast. So they've got open trading with the Oregon coast. They went to Fort Vancouver. Now this is about 1845. They were just constructing the fort at that time. But when the 15 men were massacred, Jedediah Smith and 2 other men were up the Smith River. A man named Black got attacked and escaped. He came up separately. So the 4 survivors of the massacre made it to Fort Vancouver. This was the end of our rendezvous. This was our end point. And they met with John McLaughlin. He was head of the fort, and he was totally shocked to find Americans in what he was considering British territory. His history is interesting. He later became an American citizen and claimed land in Oregon City. But at this time, he was the most powerful man in Western United States, as far as far-reaching ability, as far as employees, as far as travel routes, as far as wealth. You can measure it any way you want. There was no one person that had more power over a larger area of the Western U.S. than John McLaughlin. So he described it, and I haven't described it, I'm not going to, but the slaughter of the 15 men, he went to Black, and I'm not thinking it is, for Arthur Black, and Black showed up. He thought he was alone, he thought he was the lone survivor. McLaughlin writes his story and puts it down as a record to send to what had happened. And then the next day, Jedediah Smith and 2 other survivors show up. So now there's 4 survivors. But McLaughlin, when he first started writing, had only talked to Black. So now with the 4 people there, he makes the decision to go back and recover the materials. He set out Alexander McLeod to do a trapping expedition to California. And he had that all set up for going to California, all the men, all the gear, all the horses, all the supplies. And instead, because of this changed circumstance, he said, go do a recovery of the Americans. Go there, get their beaver hides back. They had about 700 beaver hides. Get their horses back. If you decide to punish the Indians, you can decide. So this is right after a massacre in western Washington, where some Indians had killed McLaughlin's son and 2 or 3 others. And so McLaughlin had sent in a group, I think McLeod even led it, and they slaughtered 15 or 20 people in retribution. So the idea was, do we want to set up good trade relations with these people, or do we want to kill them and teach them that you don't kill people? The Indians thought that the Hudson's Bay Company was good people. They'd met them a year before. They had been able to trade for beaver skins. They had wealth that they hadn't expected. They had good working relations with the British. And they heard that the Americans were bad, so they were kind of thinking that maybe they'd done something really good that the British would like. But then the British said, no, we're going to go back and recover the goods, and we're going to let you decide in the field whether to punish the Indians, and by punish, I meant kill. So this is our tour. We're just ending up here. This is our last picture, last day. The 4-day tour is over. So the second part is, what do we do about this location that's really important to Oregon history, really important to U.S. history, fairly important to British history. When Jedediah Smith met with McLaughlin, that was the coming together of the British and the Americans in Oregon country that was unprecedented, unplanned, totally surprised. When Smith went back to Washington, D.C., he rediscovered South Pass. So he mapped that out. He learned mapping from my relative, David E. Jackson, who was a surveyor and business partner. And he mapped out the South Pass and promoted it as a way for Americans to come out to the Willamette Valley, which you could now describe as just a wonderful, beautiful place with lots and lots of pasturage and wide open and a very low Indian population because of disease. So if anybody's interested, I wrote the whole story of what I just showed you. It's in a magazine article, so you can read about it with a couple photos. And there's the website. We've got all 4 guidebooks, a couple hundred photos, half a dozen or a dozen maps at this location. If you go to ORWW, you can find it real quickly. It's the very first link because it's the newest one. So here's the route from Fort Vancouver. When Jedediah Smith went out with McLeod, he returned with him. Black returned, so Smith's people returned with McLeod's people, and they traveled down to Oakland area, and then over to the South Umpqua, and then up, and then over to the mouth of the Smith River at the mouth of Umpqua. So again, those are the campsites, but now the records aren't. Now the records are Hudson's Bay Company records. And one of the people they meet with is an Indian guy named Starnews, or St. Arnews. And he is Umpqua chief. He's really well known. He apparently had a village in Elkton area, which was Kalapuyan area. He traded regularly on the coast. He was respected and traveled with several people and traded with the Hudson's Bay Company. So he was friendly with them, he was known to them, and he gave an account of the massacre that was secondhand. So Starnews's account and Black's account, which was firsthand, and McLaughlin's account, which is secondhand, and Starnews's account, which is secondhand, come from the Indian side, the British side, and the American side. And the amazing thing is, most of us don't know that because they don't teach this in school. It was a really important part of Oregon history and U.S. history. So this is on the, in full color, the ceiling of the South Dakota Capitol building. It's the hugest mural in the state of South Dakota, and it shows Jedediah Smith praying over somebody. And the reason this is significant is that there were 3 basic massacres of the fur traders during the fur trade era from 1824 to about 1840. And Jedediah Smith was involved in all 3. And then he was later killed by Indians outside of a massacre. But the first one was the Arikara Massacre. I think it was in North Dakota. And a person was wounded there. And so Jedediah Smith is said to have said a prayer. And then the account of him saying a prayer over that person was sent to the father of the person that died, that was killed. And then that was it was the first Christian prayer in South Dakota. So that was such a monumental event that they painted the entire ceiling of the Capitol building depicting the first Christian prayer in South Dakota. And the reason we have that is because as the men returned to the massacre site, they found remains of the men 2 months later. They say 11 because they think 4 others may have survived, but it's 15 men. And they buried them and probably said last services. Now what was unusual about the Hudson's Bay Company is they had Catholics. And what was Jedediah Smith was a Methodist. So we don't know if it was a Catholic ceremony or a Methodist ceremony or what. We do know that 15 men out on the shore with coyotes and Indian dogs and ravens and vultures and sand fleas were probably a bunch of scattered bones. So probably a common burial and probably scattered bones was it. So here is how we know where this was. This is an 1856 survey. So this is 28 years later. The man surveying it has got Indian guides, some of whom could remember the massacre, probably some of whom took part in it, It was only one generation earlier, or at least had close relatives that did, and they described this location as the massacre site. So that's the one we've been using at the mouth of Smith River, the aerials I've showed you, and this is the next record, 1856. And then 144 years later, somebody thought, you know, this is kind of important. So this is Al LePage, and what he did was he took the tour that I just showed you, and he stopped at all the camping places I just showed you, slightly different because we did more research, and he kept a journal, and then he delivered that. So that he did that in the year 2000, and he replicated day by day where Smith and his men had camped on June 30th. That's where Al camped. So that brought up a good group of people. Person on the second to the right there is Wayne Knopf. He's a good friend. I've never met him in person. He's about 85 or 88. He's a Colville Indian, but he was really interested in Jedediah Smith. So from the year 2000, for the next 15 or 20 years, he tried as hard as he could to get that land put in as a national monument. So he tried really hard through the Jedediah Smith Society to do that. Man next to him is Jim Auld. He's a famous historian. He's written about Jedediah Smith and so on. Jim Auld is, I don't know how good a field researcher he was. He thought the massacre site was in an entirely different location, and they got in a snit about it. But this is showing they're leading a wreath. They're naming the names of the people that were killed there, and this is the year 2000, and they're off and running to create a memorial. Here's another article from the paper. It's showing the map I just showed you. It's describing what's going on. It's describing the interest of the site, which has just been renewed by LePage and by the Jedediah Smith Society 24 years ago. This was the sign nearby about Jedediah Smith and the occurrence that the state put up along the highway. And it's actually pretty darn accurate. It's pretty well. We put a lot of these up during the 1959 centennial, Oregon history, and they tell the story of what happened there. The Jedediah Smith, he wasn't killed there. 15 guys were killed there, but they tell the story pretty accurately. Then a tree fell on that, and they replaced it with a, I think the word is woke sign. The massacre turned into a skirmish, and there's a big sign of Jedediah Smith and the trappers covering the whole United States, and they entirely miss and avoid the local history. And that's probably because of local politics, but local politics 180 years later. So here's a Max and Kathy Schneider right here. And Max is a cadaver dog, and he's got an acronym that I can't remember for cadaver dogs. But we went to that location and we said, where were these men buried? There's some controversy here. Auld says one place, Wayne says another place. The map says Wayne is right. I looked at this area in the late 80s. This is where my kids and I camped out at that time. And so Max went down the road and got a very strong sense exactly where the area was that I showed you on the map. Now, it could have been a suicide, it could have been somebody hit by a car, or it could be the burial site, and it's coincidental that Max and the map from 1856 exactly match. So here's David Gould. When you saw the people standing around saying, you know, we should have a monument here, David Gould's an old friend of mine, and he died tragically January 1st of this year. But he was taking the leading role. He said, I'm going to donate a stone to this site. We're going to have a monument here. So this is the Main Rock Quarry, which is close to David's home. His family was big into quarries, big into logging, big into road maintenance. He was a second generation. His son's the third generation, carrying the family business forward, Coos Bay timber operators, and a good friend of the Main Rock people. So the rock and back is the one he chose. He wanted that one. He put a lot of work into it. And then the Jedediah Smith powers that be said, we like the bigger rock. So he was outvoted. So we chose the bigger rock. There's a Coos Bay timber operator's truck and main rock quarry, and they're loading the rock into the back of a dump truck. There they're dumping it at the site that you saw earlier with the people milling around. What are we going to do here? And David says we're going to put rock here. And then the Mass brothers from Reedsport brought in the heavy equipment and lifted the rock and put it exactly where Dave told them. There's Richardson Masonry, a local Reedsport business. He came in to mount the plaque, so he drilled into the rock to mount the plaque. There's Larry, I'm not going to remember his name. He's got a foundry right on the Oregon Trail up on Mount Hood, a small family business, and so he did a bronze plaque that I designed to put into the rock that David had donated. So there's me and David and the rock. About 15 minutes after it was put in, we put out a series of 3 reports. One of the reports is Kathy and Max finding the location. The last report is what I'm showing you now, where we put the rock into place, the memorial into place, and the bronze plaque into place. And so it made the newspapers for the first time since 2000. In 2023, we made the Coos Bay paper and the Oregonian. And you can see Larry up there with the plaque, and you can see me and David with the finished memorial. And so if you go to Smith River today, there's a memorial. So that all got done, and I think my sales pitch is going to start pretty quick. Oh, I'm going to read the names here. There's Thomas Dawes, John Gaither, John Hanna, Abraham LaPlante, probably a Métis, Joseph Lapointe, Emmanuel Lazarus, a German, Toussaint Marichal, French-Canadian, Martin McCoy, Joseph Palmer, Peter Ranney, probably a black man, or John Peter Ranney, probably a black man. One of them is white. One of them might be a free trapper or a slave. We're finding that out now. John Robiseau, probably French-Canadian. Harrison G. Rogers, the historian that I showed you what he'd been writing. Charles Swift and Thomas Virgin. So those are the men that were buried there. This is one of the we registered this cemetery in 2023. This is one of the very earliest, if not the earliest cemetery in Oregon. We think maybe Fort Vancouver or Astoria might have an earlier one. But this is certainly a major achievement for the Jedediah Smith Society after 24 years to try to get recognition. So here's the whole story that I've been telling you. I'm going to wrap it up pretty quick here. This is the storyboard designed by me and Amaya, I'm not remember her name. Ellen Amaya. We made it to look like a 1850s newspaper, and we used first-hand accounts. We used journal entries from Rogers. We used an abbreviated form of McLaughlin's report. We used the account of Star News the Indian. We have a brief biography of each of the men. We have the 1856 map, and we've got the 1845 drawing of Fort Vancouver, and the headline, Smith, Jackson, and Sublett. That was the name of the company. We call them the Rocky Mountain Fur Company, but Jedediah Smith, David Jackson, and William Sublett were the owners, and that was the official name. So the official name of the cemetery is Smith, Jackson, and Sublett Cemetery. This is designed to be 6 feet wide, and there's the owner and the printed sign that we made for the dedication on October 28th, 2023. That was the 195th anniversary of the burial. And so October 2028 will be the 200th anniversary, and our nonprofit is hopeful of having public awareness and some kind of celebration of that. So here's the artist's rendition of what it would look like. Here's what we did on October 28th. We took the sign and we put it up by the old way station to give you an idea of the size of it. And this is the location. This is a walking distance away from the memorial stone. So we've got these registered on the internet now. And there is what we're hoping to achieve. So if you know any wealthy individuals or businesses or history societies that are looking to create a permanent monument, this is our next step, which is the storyboard. And whether we integrate the way station or build it from scratch, we've got till October, and we can probably get a delay if we need one. And this was the day we donated it. Those are my two great grandkids, my grandson, his country wife, my favorite dog, Pepper, and this is October 28, 2023. And we want kids to know about this, the local kids, future generations, younger people. And so this is the stone in place and people celebrating its first day. So that's the very last slide. Oregon Websites and Watersheds Project took over sponsorship of this from Jedediah Smith Society. We're a 501c3 nonprofit, and we're looking for sponsors for the storyboard. Thank you very much.
Does anyone have questions for Bob?
A question?
Yeah. Where do the shipping and folks coming to the coast via ships and bringing cargo and supplies, where are they in the timeline of their travels?
Well, people were probably coming by ship for thousands of years. We don't generally recognize it. The earliest records are, we've got probably Japanese, but we've got trading ships. The earliest records are 1780s, but we don't have any that are specific to the Umpqua or specific to this tribe of Indians. We have them for Tillamook fairly well, from 1788, I think, because there was a killing there. And there's some records from the 1500s with Drake, but whether he made it all the way up to Oregon or not is debatable. But these are the first records.
I was mainly curious, as they would land on shore, if they wouldn't record in their travels of here's a beach, here's an access, so that it would provide some information about what's up ahead on the coastline as Jedediah did his.
Yeah, they had irregular shipping. Almost everybody in those days was illiterate, so they weren't writing down things. And then they weren't landing on shore. Most of the Indians were going out to the ships with canoes to trade. So there's very, 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 very little landfall. And this is by far the most extensive, complete record of the coastal land and the people that live there. And up.
What was the name of the first massacre that the natives did, or that they did to the natives? And then there were other massacres that followed. It looks like there was quite a few.
The massacres in Northern California with the gold miners were terrible. One of them involved over 400 Indians. The Nassau Massacre that I showed you was 1851. The Umpqua Massacre is 1828. There were some minor killings, maybe massacre aside from the Hudson's Bay Company and the Yacona Indians in 1827, 26. But there's really so much barbarism going on in those days that whites against Indians, Indians against whites, Indians against Indians. Not all the events are named, and the ones that are named massacre, then that's been getting changed for political reasons. So it's hard to say. The one in Northern California, the most shocking one, is 1858 or 59, and local people in Crescent City went into a village, and while the men were away on some kind of spring ritual and killed all the women and children, 120 of them. 400 were killed, as I say, in another massacre about the same time. So that was Northern California. Down in Southern California, there was slavery there for about 100 years. We're talking about reparations, but the Indians were the ones that were enslaved and really brutally treated by the Catholics for 5 or 6 generations of people. So there's no, we give those labels to things, but there's no real specific answer. A lot of people died, a lot of people were killed. They didn't have laws, so it wasn't murder, it was, but there's consequences.
One more, how closely did the Indians relate with one another in the whole trip? Do they, I mean, I know that the Northwest Indians actually formed groups of tribes that worked together, that cooperated. Is that true growing up?
Cooperated and then fought, enslaved each other, traded with each other, people are people. So there's all kinds of interrelationships. The travel routes were well developed. Foot trails were well developed. Some of the tribes could travel by ocean real well. And so there's a lot of transportation, a lot of slavery and marriages and trading and warfare that was being carried on by those 2 routes. They didn't have livestock, so it was all foot trails and ocean-going craft. Yep. Oh, yep.
So you talked about after the massacre, the 4 made it up to Fort Vancouver and told their stories, and then there was a group that was sent back to get back the materials, and then do what they punishment is if they wanted to. Do you have any idea what they ended up doing?
Oh, yeah. When they got back, they didn't kill any of the Indians. They decided to have good relations. Star News was really helpful there. They recovered 200 or 300 of the 700 beaver hides because those weren't much use to the Indians. They recovered 30 or 40 horses. Simpson at the Hudson's Bay Company paid them a real good price just to kind of rid himself of it, but also a gesture of goodwill. He's kind of a tightwad otherwise, so he did really good by Jedediah that way. But they recovered, they spent too much time there. McLeod got probably demoted, we could say that, because he was supposed to go down there, do a recovery and return. They went down there and spent a few weeks' times and piddled around and took side trips. But they did recover the journals. So the fact we have this history was a really important thing that they did get. Almost all the other stuff, the stuff that the Indians wanted was gone. Most of the horses had been killed and eaten. All the cloth, all the metal, all that had been taken. They did recover a few guns and pistols, but the Indians really didn't have much use for those because they didn't have gunpowder or lead. So it was kind of a fishing weight. Well, thank you very much.
Okay, I've got one here. So Bob, before you go, I have a question. Have you ever heard of the Immel Jones massacre in Montana?
No.
Okay. My super great uncle was Michael Immel, who was actually killed in that massacre. But that was an international incident, and the Blackfeet Indians were hired by the Hudson Bay Company to eliminate their competition.
I probably read about it and didn't know about it.
Yes, yes.
What year was that?
1823.